Texas, September 1943. The sun had already vanished behind the tree line when they brought in the new prisoners. Among them, Hauptmann Friedrich Weiss, 35. A Luftwaffe communications officer captured outside Tunis. He limped slightly from an old shrapnel wound, but his posture was perfect. Chest forward, eyes steady, still holding on to the old pride. The guard tower lights buzzed softly. Flood lamps hummed against the night, and then a sound rose from across the fence. Not the clang of boots, not shouting, not orders. Music. Soft, slow, precise. Mozart. Requiem in D minor. The Lacrimosa movement. Friedrich froze. His eyes narrowed. He turned his head toward the sound just past the row of barracks. A phonograph. American-made, sat on a wooden desk inside the guard shack. The tune drifted across the compound, carried by the warm Texan wind. One of the other German prisoners muttered, "Mockery?" But Friedrich whispered, almost to himself, "Barbarians don't play Mozart." He stood in the sand, listening, longer than he should have. The war felt far away, too far. And what he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that this music, this simple melody, would be the beginning of everything unraveling. 6 months earlier, North Africa, Friedrich Weiss stood beside a half-buried Panzer IV, its turret blown open by a British shell. The desert wind howled over the dunes, scouring the paint off twisted metal. Around him, the remnants of the Afrika Korps scrambled to dig in or retreat. Even then, even in retreat, he believed in victory. They all did. Friedrich served in the 10th Panzer Division. Signals officer fluent in Morse, radio wave theory, and a dozen forms of military encryption. He'd trained under General Hans-Jürgen von Arnim, wrote field reports with precision, trusted the Reich's numbers, their codes, their system. "We are the edge of the sword," his commanding officer once told him. "The tip of civilization." Friedrich believed that, absolutely. What the Americans had in tanks and trucks, they lacked in culture, in discipline, in blood. He'd seen Allied leaflets littering the sand, cartoons, Coca-Cola slogans, black jazz singers grinning. To him, it wasn't propaganda. It was proof. Proof they were children playing war. When the order came to surrender, Friedrich didn't flinch. He wiped his boots, adjusted his collar, and walked into captivity. As if stepping into a debate he planned to win. He was flown across the Atlantic under armed guard. No shackles, no beatings. The Americans offered white bread, orange slices, and coffee. He refused it all. He didn't want comfort. He wanted confirmation. They disembarked at Camp Hearn, Texas, just after sunset. A vast plain of barbed wire and wooden barracks surrounded by empty sky. It was cleaner than he expected. Too clean. The guards stood at ease, rifles slung low, wearing uniforms without creases. One of them, a young corporal, was reading a paperback titled "The Sun Also Rises." Friedrich scoffed. Americans and their novels. But when they were escorted to the mess hall, something strange happened. He saw order. The food was served on time. The lines moved. Men, even prisoners, spoke in quiet tones. The guards didn't bark. They nodded. A few days later, Friedrich received a folded note. Music rehearsal. Ram Rec Hall. All instruments provided. He thought it was a trap, some psychological game, until he saw it. A real piano, violins, sheet music, German sheet music. He walked away disgusted. These people, he told a fellow officer, have no soul. They borrow our culture like children playing dress-up. But that night, just like the first, he heard the music again. Mozart, clean, untouched. Not for show, not mockery. Played softly, like it meant something. And Friedrich couldn't help but wonder, if these are barbarians, why do they sound like home? By the third week at Camp Hearn, Friedrich Weiss had mapped the routine. Wake at 0600, roll call, mess hall, assigned labor or language classes, lights out at 2100. It was efficient, almost military, but it wasn't German. There was too much calm, no screaming, no fists slamming on tables, no boots thundering through barracks at night. The guards wore sidearms, but their eyes held no hatred, only boredom, and something worse, pity. Friedrich found himself watching Corporal Henry Webb. 21, Southern accent. Always carried a book in his back pocket. Hemingway, Steinbeck, Twain. One day, while escorting prisoners back from fence maintenance, Webb pointed at the Texas horizon and said, "You ever seen sky like this in Bavaria?" Friedrich didn't answer. He didn't like how the boy smiled. Not cruel, not arrogant, just sure of himself. That night, Mozart again. But this time, the Marriage of Figaro overture. Fast, playful. Laughter came from the guard shack. Someone misplayed a note, and the others clapped. The music wasn't being used as a weapon. It was joy, casual joy, and that made it worse. Inside Barrack 8, a few younger prisoners whispered about escape, tunnels, disguises. Friedrich said nothing. He was staring at a flyer pinned to the wooden wall. American History Club, topic this week, Emerson versus Nietzsche. He stared at the names. Emerson, Nietzsche. Two worlds that were never meant to meet. In Berlin, philosophy was weaponized. Everything served the Reich. But here, they debated ideas for fun. He remembered Professor Kruger at the university, who vanished in 1937 after quoting the wrong verse. Here, they pinned ideas to walls like jokes. Later that night, as he lay in his bunk, Friedrich listened again. This time, it wasn't classical, it was jazz. Clarinet, slow, lazy, like smoke, curling in a tavern. He felt that something in his chest tighten. Was this music better? No, that couldn't be some. But why couldn't he stop listening? It started with a violin, not an American one, a German-made, 1912 Markneukirchen. Hand-carved. The kind played in symphonies before the war. Friedrich found it resting on a cloth inside the rec hall, next to a small card that read, "Donated by the Houston Conservatory." He picked it up, tuned it by ear. The strings purred like old memory. When he asked the camp coordinator where it came from, the man shrugged. "We got friends in town who still believe music matters." That evening, Friedrich stayed, just to listen. They played Beethoven's Seventh, second movement. Slow, inevitable, like something falling apart in slow motion. And that's when Corporal Webb appeared again. No rifle, no boots, just a pencil tucked behind his ear and a notepad in hand. He watched for 10 minutes, then said, "Want to know a secret?" Friedrich didn't answer. "I got a cousin plays in the Cincinnati Orchestra. He taught me this one when I was 12. Then Webb hummed the melody, exactly on pitch. Friedrich blinked. How does a farm boy in Texas know Beethoven's phrasing? He told himself it was memorized. Just mimicry. Parroted noise. But the truth sat uneasily in his gut. In Berlin, the Reich taught that Americans stole culture, that they had no roots, no spirit. But here was a guard, barely old enough to shave, humming Ludwig like he'd grown up in Vienna. 2 days later, Friedrich passed the library. Inside, Steinbeck, Dickens, Shakespeare, and Goethe. A whole shelf. Clean, organized. No propaganda, just books. He picked up Faust, ran his finger across the spine, and felt the weight of something strange. Not fear, not shame, but confusion. These people weren't pretending to respect culture. They were living in it. Across the yard, an American mechanic worked on a generator while whistling Eine kleine Nachtmusik. Friedrich watched him work, calm, precise, hands black with grease. The mechanic didn't notice. But the tune echoed in Friedrich's mind like a challenge. If they could build engines and whistle Mozart, then what was Germany fighting for? The day they opened the new shipment from New York, the air smelled faintly of sawdust and ink. Friedrich was assigned to help unload supplies. He expected canned beans or worn blankets. Instead, a crate labeled NY Philharmonic Donation. Camp Hearn Cultural Program. He pried it open. Inside, vinyl records wrapped in linen, French and German opera scores, and a handwritten letter. To the musicians of Camp Hearn, may beauty keep you human. He stared at the signature. Leopold Stokowski, one of the most famous conductors in the world, sending music to prisoners of war. Not propaganda, not leaflets, real music from a country at war. That night, he sat in the back corner of the rec hall as a fellow prisoner placed a record on the turntable. Clair de Lune, Debussy, soft as snowfall. He listened with his head down, eyes closed. Every move stabbed deeper than silence. For years, Friedrich believed music was German. That Iminen, Idur, harmony, these were their inheritance. But now, behind American fences, surrounded by guards with chocolate bars and jazz records, he felt stripped. The song ended. No one clapped. No one moved. Just breathing. Later, alone in his bunk, he pulled out his diary and wrote 6 words. If barbarians can play, Debussy. Who are we? The chapel at Camp Hearn was nothing more than a wooden shed with folding chairs and a cross made from scrap pine. On a Sunday morning in October, Friedrich entered, not for faith, but for curiosity. He sat in the back, arms crossed, listening. A Jewish chaplain in army green stood at the front. No weapon, no guards, just a small leather book and a calm voice. The sermon was titled, "What Freedom Means to a Soldier." Friedrich expected arrogance, perhaps gloating. But the chaplain spoke not of victory or flags. He spoke of conscience, of how a man must choose what is right when no one is watching. He spoke of the burden of power, that true strength lies not in orders followed, but in cruelty refused. Friedrich didn't move. But something shifted. He remembered his time in North Africa, when they cleared a Tunisian village, suspected of hiding partisans. He had followed orders, watched as men were dragged from homes, one crying out in French, "Je suis musicien." He told himself he'd forgotten that moment. But now, in this chapel, it came back like thunder. After the sermon, Corporal Webb approached him outside. He didn't mention the war, just offered Friedrich a cigarette and said, "You'll go home one day, but you'll remember this place more than you think." Friedrich didn't answer. His throat tightened. He didn't smoke that night, didn't write. He just sat alone behind the barracks, staring at the barbed wire glowing under moonlight. The Americans didn't try to humiliate him. They didn't try to convert him. And that made it worse. They were free. And they were winning. Not just in numbers, but in something deeper, something harder to measure. Rain fell across the compound that morning, soft, warm, and unfamiliar. In Bavaria, rain stung. In Texas, it felt like forgiveness. Friedrich sat under the overhang of Barrack 12, coat unbuttoned, watching the drops paint dark circles into the dirt. Next to him sat Marco, an Italian POW from the Folgore division, captured in Sicily. Younger, louder, and impossibly cheerful for a man behind wire. Marco pulled a boiled egg from his pocket, wiped it on his sleeve, and said with a grin, "You know what we ate in Naples last winter?" Friedrich shook his head. Pigeon bones, and whatever rats the cat didn't finish. He peeled the egg slowly. "Here, they give you 3 a day." "You believe that?" Friedrich didn't laugh. He just watched. Marco leaned in. "Tell me, Friedrich, when did we start losing? Sicily? Tunisia?" Friedrich whispered, "Before either." Marco nodded. "That's what I thought." Later that week, a Red Cross shipment arrived. Inside were care packages, soap, shaving cream, even letters from American families. One envelope, addressed to any German POW, contained only a Bible and a short note. "We pray your mother is safe." Friedrich didn't know what to do with it. He tucked it beneath his mattress and told no one. That same afternoon, a soldier named Miller, barely 19, handed him a copy of Stars and Stripes. It had a centerfold map showing American supply lines across Europe, hundreds of arrows, pipelines, convoys. Underneath, liberty travels fast. Friedrich stared at the chart for over an hour, not at the arrows, but at the small print beneath them. 2 million gallons of fuel delivered daily across Allied fronts. He read it again. 2.2 million. In Tunisia, they killed 3 men over a single jerry can. And here, fuel flowed like river water. That night, Webb joined them by the campfire. Marco strummed an old guitar, playing half-remembered folk songs from Naples. Friedrich asked, "Do you know anything in German?" Webb grinned. "Only Schubert." Then he whistled Ave Maria into the smoke. The notes rose and fell like ghosts. Friedrich stared at the fire. "We taught the world this music," he thought. "Now it sings back to us, unafraid." He returned to his bunk and opened his diary. "We are not prisoners of America," he wrote. "We are prisoners of our own illusions." The maps were what finally broke his breath. Pinned to the corkboard inside the education barracks, a quiet room where guards and prisoners sometimes sat side by side, watching film reels or flipping through newspapers. One day, a technical officer from the U.S. Army Logistics Corps gave a lecture. He wasn't a politician, not a propagandist, just a man who loved supply chains. He pointed to a red line stretching from a port in Cherbourg across France into Belgium. "This here," he said, "is the Red Ball Express." Friedrich leaned forward. This line moved over 4,000 tons of equipment in 3 months. Trucks drove day and night, never stopped. Drivers were mostly black soldiers. Most had never left Alabama before the war. The American tapped the map again. "No bridges? We built our own." "No fuel? We laid pipeline under the channel. We paved our own roads, invented mobile tire repair units. We standardized every bolt, every part, every tire. You break it, we replace it." Friedrich said nothing. But inside, his stomach twisted. He remembered the mountain of Tunisia, how their trucks froze from lack of coolant, how their convoys stalled for days over a single broken axle, how German supply officers carried revolvers, not for the enemy, but for deserters. After the talk, Friedrich wandered behind the mess hall and stood beside the generator, the same one he saw weeks ago, still running, still humming. A sticker on the side read, "Assembled in Indiana, 1942. He closed his eyes and listened to the low, constant thrum. Across the yard, a jeep rattled past. A soldier tossed Friedrich an orange. No words, just a nod. He hadn't tasted citrus in months. He peeled it slowly. The smell pulled him back to childhood. But now it came from his enemy. In that moment, he realized something brutal. The Americans were not improvising. They were planning, not with fear, not with desperation, but with faith in their own system. And it worked. Every day it worked. The photo haunted him. Webb had pulled it from his wallet one lazy afternoon, sitting under the water tower while peeling a green apple with his bayonet. It showed a factory in Ohio. Nothing grand, just a red brick building, tall windows, women in coveralls standing next to conveyor belts. Some smiled. One held a sandwich. A teenage boy in the corner had grease all over his face. Friedrich stared at the photo longer than he meant to. "Your soldiers?" he asked. Webb shook his head. "My people." Then he tapped the back of the photo, where someone had scribbled in pen, Detroit sends her love. Friedrich had no words. In Germany, the Reich built factories with guards at the gates and fear in the walls. People worked because they had to, or disappeared. But this was different. Why would a teenage boy build tank engines for you? Friedrich asked, quietly. He's not even drafted. Webb leaned back, tossing the ample core to the grass. Because he knows what we're fighting for. Friedrich looked away. Later that week, the POWs were marched past the camp motor pool. An American mechanic was swapping an engine from a busted Jeep. Behind him stood crates, each marked with codes, perfectly labeled. Carburetor, Type 3, Model 1944, each part interchangeable. Standardized, replaceable. Friedrich whispered. Every engine, the same. The German army had 27 different truck models, each with custom bolts, varying sizes, no shared parts. He remembered how often they had to cannibalize wrecks just to keep one vehicle moving. Here, if something broke, you replaced it. That was the difference. The Americans weren't afraid of loss. They planned for it. Not because they were careless, but because their system was smarter. At the camp library, Friedrich found a translated copy of Henry Ford's autobiography. He read it in secret behind stacked crates of Red Cross soap. One line stuck with him. You don't build a car, you build the process, and the process builds the car. The Germans built tanks like cathedrals, each one a masterpiece. The Americans built them like loaves of bread, fast, identical, good enough to feed an army. By the time he closed the book, Friedrich no longer felt proud of what his country had made, because now he understood what it had failed to make. A system that trusted people and empowered them. A culture that could survive loss, and a machine that ran not on fear, but belief. The numbers didn't lie. Friedrich stared at the chart inside the camp newspaper, stars and stripes, tracing his finger across the columns. It was a breakdown of American war production in 1944, 96,000 aircraft, 57,000 tanks, 2 and 4 million trucks, 5.5 billion rounds of ammunition, over 2 million gallons of fuel every single day. He read it twice, then a third time. Behind him, a group of prisoners played cards with torn rations boxes. Someone laughed, but Friedrich couldn't move. Back in Tunisia, they had fought an entire British armored column, with only one working radio between them. When fuel ran out, they abandoned vehicles. When orders didn't come, they guessed. They had believed in will. That discipline could overcome distance. That iron hearts could beat broken supply lines. But this wasn't just more. It was relentless. He remembered a colonel from the Africa Corps, red-faced, trembling, who once shouted, "They waste fuel like water. They burn 2 million gallons just to gain a hill." Friedrich had believed that was a condemnation, and now he saw it was the revelation. They could afford to. He read a quote in the same paper, attributed to General Patton. "My men can eat steak on the battlefield because the trucks never stop." The trucks never stopped, and neither did the belief behind them. Friedrich opened his diary, one last time. He no longer wrote in German. We sang Beethoven before battle, but we died without echo. They drink Coca-Cola in tanks and sing jazz in the mud, and the world follows the music that survives. He closed the book, stared at the orange sunset bleeding over the compound fences. There was no speech, no collapse, no sudden weeping. Just a man finally understanding that the war wasn't lost on the battlefield. It was lost in the factory, in the ballot box, in the library, in every place where freedom moved faster than fear. 30 years later, a museum stood where the fences once cut the Texas sky. Camp Hearn had become history. Wooden barracks now held placards. Footsteps echoed on polished floors, where boots once stamped in formation. A small girl sat at an upright piano near the entrance. Her fingers light, hesitant. She was practicing. The melody, familiar, almost holy. Mozart's Requiem. The same movement Friedrich Weiss had heard on his first night as a prisoner. He stood just inside the doorway, hat in hand, older now, civilian coat, silver hair. The girl's mother noticed him, smiled politely. He nodded back, but didn't speak. The music drew him in, each note hitting deeper than memory. He didn't cry. He didn't need to. He simply listened. She stumbled once, looked up nervously. He stepped closer, gently said in English, "You played that beautifully." Her eyes widened. "Do you know this song?" Friedrich smiled faintly. "I heard it once," he said, "when I thought the world was ending." She resumed playing. He stood silently, lost in the sound. Outside, American flags waved above parked cars and soda machines. A bus of school children unloaded, laughing too loudly. Inside, Friedrich whispered to himself, "We believed music was ours, but freedom plays in every key." He turned, stepped into the afternoon light, and behind him, the last note lingered.